Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to the View Up Here. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is November 14th, 2018. Tonight, by semi-popular demand, the View Up Here triple rant. Tony, the Bunk debate, and the furthest thing from resistance. Tony, despite best efforts of the Conservative Party and corporate media, there is no denying the abrupt and complete derailment of a career politician with the highest civilian security clearance in the land at his own hand. From releasing the news on US Midterm day after sitting on it for a week, to minimizing it, to retracting the minimization, being sent to the backbenches, to being out of caucus, all in 48 hours. And the corporate media coverage was sombre and regretful, with no meme-like graphics or theme music for every time you got an update. And the follow-up looks to be not too forthcoming unless absolutely necessary. Compare this with a recent, well overextended circus over a single event from more than a decade ago that involved contact above the shoulders. But according to the Conservatives, that was grounds for resignation from the planet. The Bunk debate. Now, considering the history of the Monk School, established by the billionaire family of the founder of Barrick Gold, free market extremism has always been part of the curriculum. Never an institution to miss out on a trend. It's Steve Bannon versus David Frum to populism. Now, you can almost see the goalposts moving, the pendulum moving right. And when the author of The Axis of Evil plays the reasonable entrant, you know you're on a one-way street. But, again, please, corporate media, never mention the Aurea Foundation, what's behind the Monk debates and the Monk School. Those millions that the Aurea Foundation donate to neoliberal, quote-unquote, think tanks, they're not important. The anything but resistance. Where do you start with this, really? You got a high school dropout drug dealer, a divinity school dropout, a corporate puppet, a groomed insider who has been convicted of impaired driving, and a separate vehicular homicide, and a failed waiter that was the worst Speaker of the House in history. So what exactly is this crowd resisting? Reality? Intelligence? Progress? Facts? Well, full marks to Rogers Communications owned Maclean's and their novelist Pompous Wells. Now, this isn't a failed pitch. This is just the next step in something we're going to see nonstop until election 2019. That's the triple subject for the triple rant. Half out of sarcasm, half out of I'm not really sure anymore. I'd like to say that this episode tonight shall be taken in its entirety, and it is opinion. Fair comment law. Thank you. Since Arthur Hamilton has come out from under his stately rock, one never can be too sure. Let's talk about Tony Clement, Tony Panay. I'm going to start with the letter that Tony addressed to the constituents of Parry Sound, Muskoka. And of course, if you would like your letter to go out to just a specific certain crowd, such as your constituents, by all means, put it up on the internet. That's how to keep it private. I'm going to read from Mr. Panay's statement, this November 8th. This is Tony Clement, and this message is for my constituents in Parry Sound, Muskoka. I have had the tremendous honor and privilege of serving as your Member of Parliament since 2006, a trust that has been renewed through 4 consecutive federal elections, whether on the government or opposition side of the aisle, whether serving at the cabinet table or on the back bench. My top priority has always been and continues to be working for the people and communities of Parry Sound, Muskoka. I have done so tirelessly, with passion and enjoyment from the first moment I received the honor to work on your behalf. I have always aimed to serve with humility, and today I am writing to you directly to address a number of poor decisions in my personal and private life. During a period of personal difficulty and weakness, I engaged in inappropriate exchanges that crossed lines that should have never been crossed. These exchanges led to acts of infidelity. One inappropriate exchange led to a woman being offered money by an anonymous social media account in exchange for the disclosure of intimate and personal information. I immediately reported this personal matter to the OPP last summer. Most recently, another inappropriate exchange led to foreign actors attempting to use my indiscretion for financial extortion, which, without hesitation or second thought, I immediately reported to the RCMP. While these exchanges were entirely consensual and mutual, they were absolutely wrong and should never have occurred. In conducting myself this way, I've let down myself, my family, my friends and supporters, my community, my work colleagues, and my staff. Basically, everyone I care about and who care about me. Pride and vanity got the better of me, and shame held me back from getting back to the path of good. I apologized to the woman with whom the exchanges occurred, and I also apologize to anyone else who felt in any way that I crossed online boundaries that made them feel uncomfortable, even without my knowing. I am deeply sorry. Then we get the standard own up. I return to the words of Mr. Clement. In particular, I have failed the most important person in my life, my wife, who has been with me through the many ups and downs of public service. She has made many sacrifices along the way in order to build a loving home and a wonderful family. I cannot undo the pain and hurt my actions have caused. All I can do is own up to what I have done and commit myself to rebuilding our trust, however long that may take. The mistakes I have made in my personal life, for those who know me, do not reflect who I am. I am resolved to refocus, to work hard, and to heal the damage I have caused to those most important in my life. And of course, the last paragraph says, yeah, I'm keeping this job, like vote Tony. It's cool. So this is the starting point that I've chosen because, hey, I'm just being fair. Let's let the one accused speak first, shall we? It can never be said that the view up here does not allow those accused to get their time. There was the issue of this news being released by the Conservative Party on the US Midterm election day, and it didn't take long before we found out that they had known about this reported incident to the RCMP for a week. Before that, the Privy Council office knew because that was protocol, since Mr. Clement is on the Committee of Parliamentarians to oversee CSIS, the CSE, the RCMP, the CBSA. He's only got the highest civilian security clearance in the whole country, maybe being extorted for your junk, yeah, you should tell somebody. So not only did they sit on it for a week, but it didn't take long before it was a sliding scale. At first, he lost his shadow cabinet. It's a matter of hours until he was kicked out of caucus. So things moved in a hurry. Now that letter came out on the 8th. This is from November 6th in the Hill Times. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has told reporters that Conservative MP Tony Clement was kicked out of caucus after numerous reports of other incidents and allegations had since emerged. Conservative MP Clement resigned from Parliament's National Security and Intelligence Committee and from his House Committee and Justice Critics duties Tuesday night after he released a statement saying he had shared sexually explicit images and a video of himself over the last 3 weeks to a consenting female recipient. So, what did Andrew Scheer have to say about it? While I'm greatly disappointed with Mr. Clement's actions, I am encouraged that he has decided to seek help, and I wish him all the best in doing so. There have been numerous reports of other incidents, allegations. So in that respect, I've asked Tony to resign from caucus so that he can respond to these allegations. Really? You had to leave a caucus to answer allegations? Since when? This is a statement from Mr. Clement, released by the party. This, again, came before his letter to only his constituents, remember. Over the last 3 weeks, I have shared sexually explicit images and a video of myself to someone who I believed was a consenting female recipient. The recipient was, in fact, an individual or party who targeted me for the purpose of financial extortion. The RCMP are currently investigating the matter to determine the identity of the party responsible for the extortion attempt. Of course, the next morning, CBC was on it. Everybody was on it. They were looking at the timeline already, how quickly it went from stepping down from shadow cabinet to, yeah, thanks for coming. CBC had been speaking to other people already. Numerous social media posters have suggested they weren't surprised by Clement's revelation. CBC News spoke with 2 young women who said they and their friends were made uncomfortable by the fact that Clement had liked so many of their social media posts over the years. The only swipe, partisan-wise, that Scheer could take was that he said, well, the committee that vetted Clement to get on NSERC, well, they didn't seem to catch it, so, it's not our fault. Well, it sounds good. It sounds good. Did Scheer suggest a replacement? No, he said he's going to leave it up to the committee. Well, that's smart. You gotta give him that much. Any other members of the NSERC committee, none of them had anything to say on the record about this, which I imagine was pretty much straight top-down order. Trudeau's office said they weren't involved, but Privy Council office said, yeah, we knew. I mean, they followed etiquette and regulation and informed them, but it's not up to the Privy Council office to trumpet it out to the world, and that's exactly why they told them. It became revealed that the extortion attempt was for 50,000 euro in Bitcoin, images and video. Thinking about that letter about how seriously he takes everything? Also on November 8th, by Alex Ballingal and Alex Boutillier in The Star. Star has interviewed 2 women who say they met Clement online and went on to have sexual interactions with him. Both women, who know each other and consulted about speaking publicly, asked the Star not to publish their names. One out of concern over Clement's reaction to her speaking publicly about him, the other because she feared ramifications in her professional life. According to the women's accounts, sometime last spring or summer, Clement became aware of Instagram accounts that sent messages about his behavior toward women, sought information about him, and posted photos of him. The women said Clement separately told them he had reported this online behavior to police. Now, this would mean that Tony Clement was aware for months that an unknown party was seeking embarrassing information about him before he went public. Now, as far as qualifications to be on the National Security and Intelligence Review Committee, The law requires that the Privy Council office be informed of any change in their personal circumstances that may affect their security clearance. Examples spelled out include criminal convictions, a change in financial situation, association with criminals, and being the subject of a law enforcement action. The RCMP, now investigating the allegation, pretty much gives everybody carte blanche to shut up. On that day in Brampton, Shears said, "People are capable of having lapses of judgment, unexpected lapses of judgment. People make mistakes. When those mistakes are brought to light, then people take accountability for it, and organizations and groups will work with them, have a right to make decisions as well." And that's why I believe that the right course of action was for Tony to respond to these allegations from outside caucus. Let's translate that. Yeah, he did the right thing. Yeah, manly thing to do. We kicked him out for it. The first woman who spoke to the Star is in her early 20s. She said Clement added her on Instagram last year and liked some of her photos. He started sending her direct messages, which she said became flirtatious and then overtly sexual. She said they started consensually sharing intimate messages, and he sent her explicit images. He would talk dirty to me, then send me nude photos and videos. He asked her more than once to meet for coffee or come to his house, but the woman said she made up excuses to avoid going. She has never met Clement in the real world. A few months ago, woman believes it was in June or July, Clement asked her to delete all records of their conversations. She said the MP told her he was concerned his Instagram account was quote-unquote hacked and asked her to only speak to him over WhatsApp. The woman said she complied. Soon after that conversation, an unknown user added her on Instagram. She said that account messaged her and alleged Clement engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior towards women. The woman that the Star interviewed, who said she didn't know who was behind that account, took it as a warning. Now, the woman did provide the Star with screenshots of these messages that do not show the name of the account, and it was dated July 2nd. The woman said she told Clement about the message and that he begged her to believe the message was not true and that she was the only woman he was interacting with. Here it is. It's all in the paper. It's online. And this is the guy that's, the last few weeks I fucked up. Unbelievable. Later, in what the woman recalls to be late July, she spoke with Clement again about the strange Instagram accounts. The woman said Clement told her someone was after him for money and that he told her he reported the activity to the RCMP and the OPP. Well, that's July. The rule I read from the Privy Council office is if you're a subject of a police investigation, you have to inform them. That was July. The second woman who spoke to the Star is also in her 20s. She, too, met Clement online when he added her on social media. The woman said he started liking her pictures and then started sending her direct messages that often included kiss and heart emoticons. She said she went on to have an intimate relationship with Clement. She said she decided to end their relationship because the 57-year-old MP is married. Good call. Sometime later in May or June of 2018, this woman said she received messages from 2 or 3 unknown users on Instagram. One of them sent information about the first woman that talked to the Star, and the 2 women connected online at that point. The second woman said one of those accounts offered her money for information about Clement. Anybody who spent any time at all in Ottawa during a working week, everybody knows what's going on. You're either clued in or you're not. And that's a whole lot of people in the clued in part. And obviously, he was being heavily monitored for months. But, last few weeks I fucked up. Okay, Tony. But of course, more started to come out. Hill Times, November 12th, by Abbas Rana and Jolson Lim. Clement had inappropriate interactions, was pushing boundaries back when he was a Harper-era cabinet minister, says a Parry Sound female constituent. A woman who lives in the conservative-turned-independent MP Tony Clement's riding says the politician sent many inappropriate messages to her, beginning during his time as a high-ranking cabinet minister in the Harper government, almost a decade ago and says he behaved like a creepy uncle who for years was pushing boundaries to the point that it embarrassed her, but says she didn't know what to do about it. Stephanie Parker, 38, has known the MP for about a decade personally and on social media. Ms. Parker, who on Twitter and Instagram goes by the handle Steph M, EHM, 2 F's in Steph, is an Ontario provincial public servant who first met Clement in around 2009 or 10 at events in Parry Sound. When she first met him, she said she was a newly signed up member of the NDP, but she did not renew her membership after a couple years. She said Mr. Clement was friendly, and she said she was a little flattered by the attention, but gradually found his online interactions creepy. Ms. Parker said she decided to do an on-the-record interview with the Hill Times because she said in the MP's first statement about resigning from parliamentary duties, Mr. Clement gave the impression it was an isolated incident, but she knew the MP had a pattern of inappropriate behavior and of frequently reaching out to young women online over many years. In the interview, she goes on to describe, case evidence, basically of Mr. Clement stalking her around the Ottawa area, sending her messages knowing what locations and events she had attended. Strange. Ms. Parker said she never received any topless pictures from the MP, but did get some odd pictures from time to time in which Mr. Clement was fully clothed. I would get pics from him showing his location, but from the point of view of his chest, like, here is where I am today. And it would be his sunroom at his cottage or house, and you could see his fully clothed body, but from his POV. I would think, why does he want to include his body like this? Why is he trying to get me to think about him like that? Ms. Parker said that in June of this year, she blocked Mr. Clement from all social media platforms. She said she has always wondered how the MP finds so much time to follow so many women on social media and still get his parliamentary and constituency work done. Ms. Parker said that earlier this year she was contacted twice on social media by anonymous individuals who were seeking information about her online interactions with Mr. Clement, but said she did not provide any and blocked the individuals who had reached out to her. Oh, Tony, if you just wouldn't have had such a rough past few weeks. Unbelievable. The rest of this article is talking to people like Tim Powers, and, what are the angles? Don't really care about that. Don't care what the Conservative MPs have to say. You know what they're going to have to say. Strategists say Tony Clement has a tough road to redemption. Now, of course, like I said, this is my opinion. On what fucking planet? Bye, Tony. There's a question if he shoe-in renomination guarantee. So, the end is nigh. Be lucky if people don't laugh at him in public. One more thing on this. From iPolitics, November 8th, Michael Harris. If Clement isn't fit for caucus, why is he fit to be anyone's MP? Though he may not know it, Tony Clement is roadkill on the information highway. This high-ranking veteran conservative politician is making the same mistake that Democratic U.S. Congressman Anthony Weiner made, deluding himself into thinking that he doesn't need to resign from public office after getting caught sexting. He does. It took Weiner a full 20 days to realize he had to resign after a photo of his man bulge in boxer briefs hit Twitter on May 27, 2011. He denied that it was him. Then more photos showed up. He still insisted he didn't have to resign. Others saw it differently. By June 11, 2011, Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic National Committee Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz had added their voices to the growing list of politicians who saw the writing on the wall for Weiner. He still refused to go, though he did offer an emotional apology. President Barack Obama let it be known publicly that if he were Weiner, he would resign. By that time, it had come out that 2 of the many women the congressman had been sexting included a Las Vegas blackjack dealer and a 28-year-old budding porn star. Finally, on June 16th, the first installment of Weinergate came to a close with the congressman's resignation. Now compare that to another case of the same time, American culture. former NFL quarterback Brett Favre, who was caught sexting a variety of women, including Jen Sturger. The New York Jets cheerleader received a text of Favre standing tall, at least part of him. When asked about it in a pregame press conference, Favre said, "I'm not getting into that." After an investigation by the NFL, Favre was fined $50,000, but not for sexting. The league had no rules about that. The fine was for not cooperating with the NFL's investigation into the matter. In the end, he was not suspended for a single game. Now, that didn't stop him from being inducted into the Football Hall of Fame in 2016. To this day, he's still doing TV commercials. Wiener was no Favre, and neither is Clement. Favre was an entertainer in the private sector who did his thing on the gridiron. His fans knew him as a football player, not an online Lothario. But Wiener and Clement held high public office. Every day they conducted the public's business, benefactors of the public trust. What they do privately cannot be divorced from their heavy public responsibility to maintain and protect the integrity of the system they serve. Both men failed utterly to do that, which is why Wiener ultimately resigned and Clement ought to do. Clement was on Canada's National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. That means he was privy to the country's deepest secrets. He has admitted that he was duped into thinking his sexting was going to a consenting woman. Back in the mid-90s, then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney lost his first cabinet minister after only 5 months in office over the same principle. Defense Minister Robert Coates resigned after it was revealed that he and 2 aides had paid a 1 a.m. visit to a strip bar in Lahr, West Germany. The bar, Tiffany's, featured nude dancers, pornographic movies, and prostitutes who might have done a little Eastern Bloc spying on the side. The accusation was that the minister, fresh from a NATO tour, had risked being compromised. After Coates resigned, tout suite, Liberal external affairs critic Jean Chrétien gave him a shout-out. "I would like to congratulate Mr. Coates because he has done the right thing." Well, doing the right thing is no longer in vogue. Now, the only other thing I want to bring up about this is this started out as a one-time thing, became a multiple-time thing within 6 hours, became a ridiculously multiple thing within 48 hours. From shadow cabinet to independent MP, that's not on circumstantial hearsay. And what is corporate media really doing? Not much. It's over for them. He's an independent now. He's fucked. Whatever. They're completely ignoring the duties that this guy held. Never mind the false claims of his so-called apology. 3 weeks my ass. Sounds like 15 years in 3 weeks, Tony. But let's look back to earlier this year, Gropegate. Remember the Conservative Party that just would not shut up about Justin Trudeau being guilty of sexual assault. It took a while, reluctance from the parties involved. Understandably, when the truth finally came out, Justin Trudeau, before he was in politics, was at a public appearance of some sort, didn't answer a reporter, and cupped her face with his hands. She wasn't too impressed because, she saw it as treating her like a child. She didn't see it as any sort of personal sexual contact. But boy, oh boy, the Conservatives sure did. For months. Then the truth came out, then it went away. But the corporate media was there every step of the way. So where are they now? Where are they now? Look at the sources I used. Okay, Toronto Star. Yeah, you expect that. But Hill Times, iPolitics, not corporate media. What a surprise. I guess I'm still reflecting on the November 5th show about messaging. But speaking of messaging, okay, just hang on. Just give me a break. Everybody relax. It's a rant show. Don't push your luck. Let's move on to rant number 2, shall we? The Bunk debate. I find that to be just too easy. I don't understand why they don't think of stuff like this. If you look at the slideshow, it doesn't take much doctoring or embellishment to their own media they put out to make it clear what's going on. When David Frum, the author of Axis of Evil, one of the premier and foremost salesmen of the global war on terror, is now put into a debate as the quote-unquote centrist, tells you we may have a problem with what you consider level debate. Apparently to the monk school, where you been? And what I'm going to start with now is National Observer. Tula Dramonis. This is from October 31st. The Monk debates, canceling Steve Bannon is not censorship. A coalition of anti-racist community groups, as well as some Canadian politicians, are calling on organizers of the Monk debates to rescind an invitation to Steve Bannon and cancel his debate with David Frum. It's a justifiable request and one that Ms. Dramonis fully supports. In the wake of recent racially and religiously motivated shootings in the United States and Canada, it is absurd and unconscionable to provide a coveted speaking platform to a hate monger. Organizers of the Monk debates, under some misguided notion of promoting free speech and encouraging uncomfortable or polarizing conversations, felt it necessary to invite Bannon to debate the rise of populism at Toronto's Roy Thomson Hall. The Monk debates are self-described as a neutral public forum to discuss challenging issues and ideas. Now, Ms. Dramonis can't help but wonder what exactly is challenging, enlightening, or edifying about ideas like racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. What haven't we figured out about these belief systems so far that we need Bannon to clarify for us? Bannon, U.S. President Donald Trump's former chief strategist, senior advisor, and co-founder of Breitbart News, is not some controversial figure who deserves to be heard and debated. He's dangerous. I'm baffled by those who downplay both his troubling past and his more recent involvement in some of Trump's most abhorrent anti-immigrant policies. Ms. Dramonis asks, have educational institutions and charitable organizations like the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and Wilfrid Laurier University started to stoop so morally low in their desperate search for controversial and revenue-generating events that, under the guise of protection of free speech and lofty notions of philosophical debate, they are comfortable with de facto supporting and encouraging abhorrent ideas? That is not protecting free speech. That's enabling and normalizing hate speech. As chief executive of Breitbart from 2012 to 2016, Bannon made the Breitbart News Network site a go-to platform for the alt-right and white nationalist movement. What about Bannon's proven track record of expressed misogyny, bigotry, white supremacy, and anti-Semitism is worthy of debate in a respectable forum like the Monk debates in the name of free speech? What exactly will they debate? Is humanity and people's worth up for debate? Why do I need to wait until David Frum, quote-unquote, annihilates or, quote-unquote, destroys him on stage, as some have suggested, so we can collectively feel better about upholding some mistaken notion of freedom of speech? Why can't I simply save Frum's and everyone else's valuable time and acknowledge right from the get-go that I don't need to listen to a takedown of white supremacy and racism to know that it's inherently bad? A debate entails two opposing ideas of similar value, which by their complex nature invites conversation and a presentation of pros and cons. Often a good debater can easily argue both sides of an argument. And there are debate topics that are so intricate, so multifaceted, and so interesting that they can be respectfully debated even if they incite major discomfort and heated disagreement. But this is not one of them. Yes, bad ideas need to be debated, confronted, and eventually denounced. Needless censorship is never desirable, and no one is interested in making free speech martyrs out of bigots. But since when is free speech absolute, and an invitation to debate offensive ideas as if they are worthy of equal consideration? When did that become a notion worth respecting and defending? So that position is clear. Now I turn to an article by Ira Wells in The Walrus called The Night Steve Bannon Came to Toronto. Now, in the days leading up to the debate, an expanding roster of politicians and activists declared Bannon a fascist and Nazi who is beyond the pale of public engagement. Charlie Angus, NDP Member of Parliament, called on the Munk Foundation to cancel the invitation out of respect for the victims of the October 27th Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Nigel Bariff and Cynthia Levine-Rasky of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations said Bannon's appearance undermines democratic principles and encourages white nationalist violence. Naomi Klein tweeted that the debate was fuel for Toronto's crisis of rising white supremacy. And if any of the people who were going inside missed those criticisms in media, there was no missing the chance of hundreds of protesters outside Roy Thomson Hall. For those in favor of the event, however, the dangerous nature of Bannon's views was the very reason he needed to be heard and debated, even by someone right-leaning such as David Frum. Michael Enright, a veteran CBC broadcaster, conceded that Bannon may be a glib, well-dressed fascist, but believed a civil confrontation with him would represent a symbol of our ability to tolerate words and thoughts we despise. Now, the key word here is symbol. For all their apparent differences, both sides were firmly united in the belief that the actual content of the debate, the potential arguments, lines of reasoning, and facts, mattered not a bit. The debate itself was the thing. Its very existence indicated either the vitality of our democratic discourse or its corruption and rot. If attendees expected an ideological circus freak, they were in for a surprise. Bannon, unlike the scabrous, disheveled figure we recall from early photos of the Trump White House, was cogent, gracious, self-possessed, and utterly unrattled by the protesters in the audience who disrupted his opening statement. Bannon was in no rush. He moved around the stage with the swaggering confidence of a veteran baseball manager. In the opening remarks, however, it was Frum who was intellectually sharper. Frum entered the debate with 72% of the audience's support, delivered a masterful opening salvo that combined humor, fact, and a series of withering attacks on the emptiness of Bannon's populism, which Frum described as a scam. Frum's weaknesses in the eyes of leftists became strengths in a battle with Bannon, where he was free to assail Bannon's populism without playing a rearguard defensive game against traditional leftist vulnerabilities. At times, Frum's rhetoric was stirring. Frum's fundamental line of attack was that nationalist populism pretends to speak for the people, but that its vision of the people depends on the deliberate exclusion of groups, entire races, sexual minorities, and ideological opponents who are construed as enemies. It was a strong, clear argument, and Frum made it repeatedly throughout the evening. He was attacking populism not from the left, but from a vision of conservatism defined as conserving liberal democratic ideals. Bannon dismissed this out of hand. For him, the extinction of liberalism is a foregone conclusion, the starting point for the conversation. The choice for him was between a left-wing populism bent on expanding the role of government and a nationalist populism devoted to the deconstruction of the administrative state. He swatted away accusations of racism as the oldest trick in the book. Bannon, too, appealed to history, arguing that millennials are the equivalent of 18th century Russian serfs. They don't own anything, and they aren't going to own anything. He characterized his populism as the only force that can counter the current economic system, rigged by the Party of Davos as a brutal form of Darwinism capitalism against the little guy in the middle. The battle lines could not have been clearer. Frum pushed to repair and renew our grand traditions. Bannon was for taking the Leviathan apart, brick by brick. Yet as they sparred over tariffs, NAFTA, and the wisdom of Trump's China strategy, people there could be forgiven for wondering what the performances added up to. Frum appeared to trust that his oratorical facility and command of the facts could convince even those bent on burning everything down. Bannon plowed on, driven by a sense of his own role in a vast geopolitical reckoning. Organizers had touted the event as a referendum on the future of Western politics. But did it actively shape those politics in any appreciable way, or was this simply a brand-building exercise for all involved? A Barnum-esque spectacle for our age of political entertainment? Frum and Bannon filled the auditorium with sound and fury, but was anyone really listening? The Monk debates, which occur twice a year, purport to confront nothing less than the major contemporary issues confronted by the Western world. Whenever possible, the organizers bring together international heavyweights, thought leaders who write bestsellers and visit talk shows. A poll is taken before and after. Debaters who change the most minds, and between 3 and 25% of spectators typically switch sides over the 90-minute debate. And when that happens, that's a win, even if they fail to persuade 50% of the audience. Newt Gingrich won a 2016 debate, convincing 6% of the audience that Donald Trump can make America great again, despite the fact that 80% of the audience voted against the motion. The odd emphasis on winning serves a dual purpose, heightening the drama of the event while also implicitly arguing for the relevance and usefulness of the act of debating itself, since some attendees do change their minds. But understand that for a minute, Newt Gingrich against Robert Reich. Gingrich was pro-Trump, Reich was anti-Trump. The audience voted 80% anti-Trump, but Gingrich was declared the winner because he moved 6% from start to end. So apparently Reich lost 6%. So what, it was 86-14 before it started, but Gingrich won. That's a pretty cool system. Now, the Munk debates have had a real neoliberal all-star list up here. Charles Krauthammer, Niall Ferguson, Samantha Power, Richard Holbrooke, Henry Kissinger, Tony Blair, Glenn Greenwald. I believe Gingrich has been on 3. 23 Munk debates have now entertained subjects ranging from state surveillance, healthcare, and Obama's foreign policy to religion, the rise of China, and political correctness. Of course, those deemed winners may reveal less about the merits of the debaters than about the attitudes of those generally well-heeled and white who pay up to $100 to attend. The longest stretch of time available to any speaker is 8 minutes, and instead privileges vast, polarizing statements. When the debate was done about Trump's election, it was an extinction-level event, according to Andrew Sullivan, or a tremendous opportunity to set the path for a new and bold direction, guided by the will of the people, Newt Gingrich. Now, as the Munk debates have grown in renown, so too have they assumed a quasi-official function within Canadian political and intellectual culture. During the 2015 federal election campaign, the Munk debates hosted Stephen Harper, Justin Trudeau, and Thomas Mulcair for an official leaders debate on foreign policy. Munk debates are broadcast by CPAC in Canada, C-SPAN in the United States, and streamed the world over on Facebook Live. The debates are meant to stand as enduring statements on the ideas under discussion, important enough for Canadian literary press House of Anansi to publish a transcript of each debate in book form. To invite Steve Bannon to a Munk debate, therefore, is to hand him one of the biggest megaphones available in Canada's political discourse. Do Bannon's ideas deserve this kind of signal boost? Certainly not, according to the many celebrities and politicians who have withdrawn from events featuring Bannon. Margaret Macmillan, a history professor at the U of T and a member of the Munk Debates Advisory Board, has little patience with the argument for silencing Bannon. I find it actually rather patronizing, this view that members of the public, including me, are so pathetic that we can't make up our own minds. I don't like the idea of self-appointed guardians deciding what I can and can't hear. Next time, someone will decide that we need to be protected from hearing Bernie Sanders. It cuts both ways. Yeah, they always say that, but it never seems to. Apologists for Bannon's invitation argue that the event could provide an opportunity for what Michael Enright characterized as intelligence gathering. That is, that hearing from our ideological opponents allows citizens to make better decisions. Yet, according to social scientific data, public debates have a negligible effect on concrete political outcomes. We remember the supposedly significant exchanges, the gotcha moments, where one candidate decisively conquered an opponent. Brian Mulroney's charge of, "You had an option, sir," against John Turner in the 84 English language debate. I remember that. Or Reagan's 1980 deflation of Jimmy Carter with, "There you go again." But analysis of the statistics tells a very different story. In their comprehensive study of 15 presidential elections from 1952 to 2008, political scientists Robert Erickson and Christopher Leeson conclude that debates do not have major impact, and that the best prediction from the debates is the initial verdict before the debates. So was there a point to this debate? Was there really anything to be decided? Was it going to make a difference in anything? No, that's not what it's about. It's just about getting it out there, giving it the platform. Anybody who has anything to do with any speaking circuit or professional associations and conventions, Bannon can now put this on his resume that he was featured in a monk debate. That could be an extra $10,000 a gig. And this guy's selling neo-fascist bullshit. Why is this happening? That's my angle in almost all of this stuff. Just like Peterson, same thing. He's doing this to make money, to create a brand. That's it. I don't know offhand, but I'm sure you could go back on the calendar or whatever and see when Peterson was at a monk debate and look at his public profile before and say 2 weeks after. Think there's going to be a correlation? That's a statement from Ira Wells, who was at the debate. The debate is almost a misnomer. It's an exhibition. Nobody's going to be defeated. Nobody's going to be victorious. It's just about, what's the word I'm looking for? God damn it. It's about justification. So who's behind that? Well, let's go to Press Progress. The Monk Debate is run by a little-known charitable foundation that is quietly bankrolling right-wing think tanks across Canada. The charitable foundation, organizing a controversial debate featuring Steve Bannon, is also one of the biggest funders of Canada's network of right-wing think tanks. The Monk Debate is a charitable initiative of a group called the Aurea Foundation. The Aurea Foundation was established in 2006 by Peter Munk, the billionaire former chief executive officer of Barrick Gold, the world's largest gold mining company, who passed away earlier this year. According to its website, the Aurea Foundation supports qualified institutions and affiliated individuals involved in the study and development of public policy, giving special attention to issues like the economic foundations of freedom and the strengthening of the free market system. Oh, jolly good, jolly good. In practice, the Aurea Foundation is one of the biggest funders sustaining a network of right-wing think tanks in Canada. Canada Revenue Agency disclosures for 2017 show Aurea distributed nearly $1.8 million in funds, including the Fraser Institute, $518,000, Macdonald Laurier Institute, $250K, the Montreal Economic Institute, $250K, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, $250K, the C.D. Howe Institute, $225,000, the Manning Foundation, $100,000. Now, between 2011 and 2017, Aurea made regular donations to these organizations. So from 2011 to 2017, the Aurea Foundation gave $1.675 million to the Fraser Institute, $1.25 million to Macdonald Laurier Institute, $1.2 to the Frontier Centre for Public Policy, Alberta Crackpots, just under $1 million to the Montreal Economic Institute, $870,000 to the C.D. Howe Institute, and $425,000 to the Canadian Constitution Foundation. John Carpe's little outfit, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, $275,000. And the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies, $252,000. Now, the Fraser Institute has received $1.7 million from the foundation since 2011 and received a $5 million donation from Monk himself in 2016 to fund an education program that provides right-wing training sessions for teachers and offers teenagers cash prizes to write essays attacking minimum wage increases. Yeah. So these are the people that are paying for this. And when I say pay, I don't mean just venue, speakers' fees. They pay for the media. They are the goddamn media. Now, there was a big petition that came out of the U of T. I mean, I think this is a real issue with the Aurea Foundation basically lock, stock, and barrel of the Munk School of Public Policy, which is in U of T's curriculum. It's a private school in a public university. So, they don't have to pay any attention to it. The needle is moving to the right. If you noticed how some of the corporate media were reacting to the protests outside Roy Thompson Hall, you know whose side they're on. So keep that in mind as we move on to the third rant. Keep that in mind, how it's not about, like David Frum saying, I'm going to destroy Bannon, and people cheering for David Frum, who wanted David Frum to die 10 years ago. That's an indication right there of how far the center is being pushed. I won't say center has moved, but it's being pushed. In the States, yeah, it's moved. Everything is judged by quote-unquote center, and it only gets better. But as we discuss this resistance, just look at the bigger picture. And I mean, the Maclean's article by Paul Wells seemed to get the focus. But this isn't just something that happened with that article. It's just the latest piece to drop. And there will be more. There will be lots more. Now, the starting point I want to start at for this, let me take a look at what I said on the show page about this. I described our members of this alliance. I would assume that Pallister has post-secondary education, but he's the only one. But then I called him the corporate puppet, not one of the other things. So I guess that would reflect. But where I want to start is, remember, Stephen Harper had a book come out not too long ago. Now, this is from October 17th. Les Weddington in the Hill Times says, on populism, Harper buys into the right wing's old ruse. As was usually the case when he was prime minister, Stephen Harper seems, in his new book, to be keeping his real thoughts to himself. In this case, in favor of some fairly mundane observations and warmed-over conservative shibboleths. Apparently worried about maintaining his celebrity status among U.S. billionaires, the former prime minister is strangely vague about U.S. President Donald Trump, describing him only as a sort of outside-the-box Republican. Harper's suggestion is laughable that Trump, while unconventional, is just trying to fix the U.S. market economy. Surely a believer in unfettered markets and liberalized trade like Harper recognizes Trump's protectionist obsession for what it is, the pursuit of a managed economy that is so anathema to so-called free market capitalism, based on interviews and excerpts from Right Here, Right Now, Politics and Leadership in the Age of Disruption by Emperor Stephen Harper. The book appears to provide no answer to the question of what Harper really thinks about climate change. As for what to do about it, Harper talks, as always, about conservation, as if parks were really the issue, and imposing better emission standards, which is something the Harper government never got around to doing. In his analysis of populism, Harper focuses on discontent among average people who fear rapid change and feel ignored by the establishment. This is the fault of, pick one or more, the elite, the media, globalization, immigrants, or cosmopolitan internationalists no longer properly beholden to their national roots. So, like Conrad Black, there is some obvious truth in this, at least in the UK and the United States. Leaving aside President Obama's efforts to help millions of Americans with health care, the Democrats certainly seem aligned as much with the corporate America in the past few decades as with average people, if not worse. Harper's view is in keeping with the epochal hoax that has made populism the perfect tool for right-wingers seeking to exploit economic angst. While globalization hurt segments of the U.S. workforce, the long-term decline in average people's prospects arose from many factors, including technology, the decline of unions, and anti-competitive corporate consolidation. But the major cause was government policy, principally the conservative trickle-down economic formula, built on the idea that tax cuts for the rich would feed through the economy positively for others. And this was, of course, teamed with social program cuts in the name of fiscal probity. It didn't work, but it did contribute enormously to the rise in wealth inequality that has seen the assets of the super rich go through the roof, while average wages have stalled for decades. This trend also occurred in Canada, where Harper eulogized tax cuts and did all he could to trim social spending. So when Harper says political leaders confronted with populism must above all pay attention to the needs of the average people, he's talking about the bandages, not the cause of the injury. Note that Harper says he's less worried about Trump than he is about leftists like British Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders. Harper is aghast at the leftist approach. insisting it would ruin the economies of the countries concerned. Emperor put out his book, and that's the tune you're supposed to dance to if you're on the International Democracy Union member list. That was in early October. Then things started to show a pattern. October 26th. This is Alex Boutillier in the Toronto Star. You may remember this from a few sources. Conservatives preparing to battle with reporters as they go for the jugular in the 2019 federal campaign. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer's office has revamped its communications team to provide a more rapid response, war room style operation. And they have not been shy about calling out reporting they don't like. At a rally in downtown Ottawa, Scheer said he would stand up to the media and accused journalists of siding with the Liberals in the carbon tax debate. We don't always get the same kind of coverage that Trudeau gets in the mainstream media. Have you noticed that? Trudeau's got the media on his side. He's got the pundits. He's got the academics and think tanks. Everyone who wants to lecture you on how to spend your own money and how to live your own life. Members of Scheer's caucus, too, have joined in. Finance critic Pierre Poilievre called the journalist for the Bloomberg Business Wire a liberal reporter. The same day, Conservative Senator Leo Housakos accused Maclean's columnist Paul Wells of being a liberal, masquerading as an independent journalist. Earlier this year, Michelle Rempel, the party's immigration critic, suggested the Canadian Press Newswire took marching orders from the Prime Minister's office. Andrew McDougall, who served as Director of Communications to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and who now writes columns for Canadian newspapers, Postmedia, said these attacks on the media are a deliberate strategy to energize the Conservative base. The 2019 election really will be an elite or an establishment or an opinion-forming establishment against the Conservatives, and that's what they're trying to gin up. The relationship between Harper and the national press was notoriously chilly, and Scheer appears to be taking the feud a step further as he approaches his first election as Conservative leader. This is Andrew McDougall again. The carbon tax being the ultimate issue, where this is a kind of policy that's almost universally supported by academics, economists, pundits. The Conservatives are betting that there's more of a common sense crowd who still have to gas up their car, who will be open to a message that this is elitism ignoring your concerns. Politicians taking issue with those that cover them is nothing new. And there's nothing improper about correcting the record when journalists get things wrong. But with the current climate in the United States, where President Trump has accused the press of being enemies of the people, some in the media and beyond have expressed dismay at the Conservatives' apparent anti-press turn. But Brock Harrison, Scheer's Director of Communications, said the Conservatives' focus on media is meant to point out specific inaccuracies or to counter columnist criticisms, not to broadly demonize journalists, as the Trump administration has done. Harrison told the Toronto Star, the party will not let instances of inaccurate reporting or attacks on our record go unchallenged. Jackie Delaney, Scheer's Director of Media Relations and a former Sun News Network anchor, echoed that sentiment in a tweet in September, writing that she goes for the jugular of media organizations that think they can throw around labels and accusations without challenge. Oh boy. Well, Brock Harrison. Stick with it, Brock. You'll get somewhere. Well, Brock Harrison was Director of Communications for Danielle Smith when she was Wild Rose leader in Alberta. He's been a candidate. He's been involved in every provincial and federal campaign in Alberta for a decade now. Now he's Scheer's Director of Comms. Well, at least we know what we're going to get for the next year. Mail it in? Sure, go ahead. So there's admission from people inside their machine that, yeah, that's what we're doing. There's no doubt about it. That's how this works. But iPolitics, Michael Harris, Scheer's promise to stand up to media is nothing more than an absurd fundraising ploy. Now, Mr. Harris starts off with, last week the Toronto Star reported that Conservatives are set to go for the jugular in the 2019 election. Mr. Harris says there's nothing wrong with going for the jugular in politics, but the jugular ought to belong to the government of the day, not the press. It is the government that comes up with policies and passes laws. It is the media that reports and opines on them. Accusing the media of siding with the Trudeau Liberals is nonsense, sounding like a spoiled brat rather than a political strategist. Sheer whine that everyone is in the Prime Minister's pocket. Apparently, he doesn't read the National Post, the Toronto Sun, Maclean's, or peruse the reports of the Fraser Institute. There is fawning aplenty for the Conservative cause in Canada. And there have also been many pieces in the media lambasting Trudeau for some foolish decisions and string of broken promises. Mr. Harris says he knows. He wrote a number of them. The Trudeau government broke its promise on electoral reform, reneged on access to information commitments, came up short on human rights, and deeply disappointed on the environment. In various places and under multiple bylines, the Liberals have been called out on all of this. Just look at some recent headlines. Why Trudeau's critics should keep it up. Susan Delacourt. Trudeau sweeps away criticism with vile personal insults, according to Andrew Scheer. That's from Althea Raj. Stop swooning over Justin Trudeau. The man is a disaster for the planet. Bill McKibben in The Guardian. On the merits, Scheer's promise to stand up to the media is absurd and nothing more than a shabby fundraising ploy. But his timing is a political abomination. Choosing to mimic Donald Trump's war with the US media in Canada and to do it in the immediate wake of what CNN described as 72 hours of American hate shows why Scheer should never be Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Harris. 2 days after that, Gillian Stewart in The Star. Kenney pledges to what? Go to war with environmentalists. Jason Kenney, a former key federal cabinet minister, looked his usual grim self when he spoke in Calgary about setting up a taxpayer-funded war room as part of his fight-back strategy should he become premier. Yes, a war room. He's mentioned it several times over the past few months, so apparently it's not just a passing whim. He even envisions satellite war rooms that could reach around the world. And what would be the purpose of such bunkers? No doubt stacked with maps, computers, weaponized social media, and trigger-happy troops? To attack environmental campaigners every time they utter something about Alberta oil, pipelines, carbon emissions, or oil pollution. Because as Kenney sees it, environmentalists have brought Alberta to its knees, and he's just not going to take it anymore. According to Kenney, with a highly successful, deliberate, well-organized, and hugely well-funded campaign of defamation, environmentalists have managed to landlock Canadian energy and thereby cost Alberta and the rest of Canada billions of dollars. His war room, which would be paid for with taxpayers' money, would respond in real time through paid and social media to all the lies told about Canada's energy industry. Kenney told a conference organized by Monty Solberg, one of his fellow cabinet members in the Harper government, and partly sponsored by a grassroots group that is closely associated with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Monty Solberg, former MP in Southern Alberta, LDS. Kenney's intended targets include the Suzuki Foundation, the Pembina Institute, Greenpeace, Tides Foundation, and even the Rockefeller Foundation. As far as he is concerned, they are enemies of Canada's energy industry and need to be subdued, even if it takes taxpayers' money to do it. Okay, I got to stop for a minute. Well, of course, if it involves taxpayers' money to do it. They wouldn't waste their own money on such a stupid undertaking. And that's not all. If he becomes premier, Kenney plans to encourage a prominent oil company to sue Greenpeace, as Resolute Forest Products has in the U.S., to the tune of $300 million. This is the kind of litigation, Kenney said, that Alberta-based energy companies need to undertake if they expect to receive the necessary social license to develop resources that belong to all Albertans. Now, that would certainly turn the idea of social license upside down. What's strange about all this, if not downright ludicrous, is the idea that Canada's energy industry is somehow a pathetic victim that doesn't have the ability or resources to defend and promote itself. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, an industry association that includes all the major oil producers operating in Canada, has a multi-million-dollar annual budget. It is one of the most well-funded and active lobby groups in the country. Add to that the millions that each oil, natural gas, or pipeline company spends on communications, PR, media relations, community relations, and social media, and it's clear the industry should have no problem fending for itself when it comes to getting what is considered the right message to Canadians. If Kenny and certain petroleum companies believe that the message isn't getting across, maybe the problem's with them and not with the environmental organizations they are so quick to condemn. Unbelievable. Yeah, he must have been in Harper's cabinet, that stunning government that has a lifetime record in the Supreme Court of Canada of 2-42. Indeed. There's the recent background on Jason Kenney and his war that has to be fought. He's not calling out the media directly. He's going after environmentalists, those eco-terrorists. So Scheer's aiming at the media. Kenney's aiming at environmentalists. What's going on in Saskatchewan? Well, if you need some evidence of how this is a coordinated national program, turn to the Regina Leader Post, November 1st. Morgan Modziecki saying that Premier Scott Moe's jet-setting travel is adding up. Since taking over the Premier's office roughly 9 months ago, Scott Moe and member of his provincial cabinet have traveled around Canada, to China, Israel, Mexico, and the United States several times. Next week, for the second time in roughly a year, a Saskatchewan minister will travel to India. Expensive travel under Moe's tenure was the 9-day trip he took to China in September. According to the travel disclosure statement, the purpose of the trip was to advance Saskatchewan's trade, investment, and carbon capture and storage interests with China. Moe told reporters the trip was productive in advancing Saskatchewan's trade efforts with a number of organizations and businesses in that country. But no trade deal was signed, and as a result of the week-long voyage that saw Moe and a Saskatchewan delegation make stops in Beijing and Heilongjiang province, the Premier himself is responsible for the top 5 most expensive trips between January and the end of September. A trip to New Brunswick to attend the 2018 summer meeting of Canada's premiers cost around $18,000. A trip to Arizona in May cost $14.5K, and a trip to Washington, D.C. ran up a little more than $13,000. Now, there's have to go to the end of the column. That's why a little bit of silence. I had to find it. I knew it was here. Think about this. This is the second time that Scott Moe is going to India in a year. And Scheer went to India. And Kenny's been to India. And look what's happening with social media and data harvesting and psychometrics. Now you need more proof that there's some sort of concerted effort going on here, like an effort that maybe, an organization like the International Democratic Union could coordinate, since India is a member of that as well. You go right to the end of the article. This is the NDP leader, Ryan Miele, saying he has no problem with useful travel of value, but said that's difficult to measure. We need to have realistic and meaningful goals when we do this, he said, adding a recent trip to Toronto by Moe to bash the carbon tax with Ontario Premier Doug Ford was political. Just like, as the View Up Here did, an entire episode on the Lugan rally in Calgary, where Doofus Dofo flew out here to do whatever it is he does in front of a live microphone. Taxpayers of Ontario, you paid for that bullshit. Why? So he could come out here and say, it's a total scam. What else has been going on in Saskatchewan? Because they're so worried about the carbon tax, it's going to take money from everybody. It's going to make everything more expensive. As people are aware, in Saskatchewan, the STC was in effect Greyhound within Saskatchewan. The Saskatchewan government closed STC before Greyhound stopped in the rest of Western Canada. There just wasn't money for it. The GTH, the Global Transportation Hub, there is nothing global in Regina that doesn't involve an internet connection. End of story. But the Global Transportation Hub is nothing but a big industrial park on the outskirts of Regina. It's been heavily subsidized. It's subject of lawsuits. I would love to see Brad Wall get subpoenaed, because it could happen. But all it is a bunch of warehouses out in the middle of nowhere with them screwing up the highways to make off-ramps and shit like that. There's really not much happening out there, especially for the money that was spent in the land flips. But STC could not be maintained for bus travel around the province. Saskatchewan, as you may know, has a lot of small places, and they ain't all that close a lot of the time. It has stranded a lot of communities, not only for moving people, moving goods. The minister responsible for the Global Transportation Hub, Don Morgan, says his government is reviewing a decision to provide a $500,000 subsidy to the Global Transportation Hub's bus service, which shuttles workers to and from Regina for the businesses in the GTH. Over the past 4 years, the GTH paid a private contractor, First Canada, $1.4 million for a bus service that runs routes designed around the shifts of two private companies located at the GTH, Loblaw and Amterra. On the average, there are 900 individual bus rides per month. The GTH says most of the passengers work at Loblaw. During that same period of time, the GTH collected $934,000 for the service from member businesses. The remaining $500,000 was picked up by taxpayers. So remember that thing about the elites and everybody's against you. Really, they are. What is the Ford government doing to prove how on the ball and for the people they are? They're spending $106,000 on new signs that say, "Welcome to Ontario, open for business." Unbelievable. A spokesperson from Premier Ford's office, Simon Jeffries, said the current More to Discover signs will be covered with a new sticker that says "Open for Business." Of the 18 locations where signs will be upgraded, 3 locations are missing 4 signs and must be replaced. The cost of replacing the 4 missing signs is estimated to be $32,000, and the estimated cost of upgrading 21 existing signs is $74,700. It just said that the signs will be covered with a new sticker. 21 stickers is $74,000. In total, this exercise is estimated to cost $106,700, which is a necessary cost to show the world that Ontario is open for business. So I guess Jeff Bezos won't know that until he drives into Ontario and sees that on a sign. The Open for Business tagline was a rallying cry for Ford during the spring election, when he used it to show how his government would run the province differently than the previous Liberal government did. Oh, yes. Now, NDP member of Provincial Parliament Taras Natishik dismissed it as a waste of money. To think that billboards with a cheesy slogan on them is going to actually incentivize and attract investment is foolish. I think people would rather see dollars invested in supporting startups in the province and support for training and small business development rather than some vanity sign posted along the border. But earlier in the week, Premier Ford himself defended the signs as one of the best investments we could do, advertising to the world that Ontario is open for business. What a fucking clown that guy is. So the target has been established is a carbon tax. Sticking to Ontario, David Reevely, Ottawa Citizen, his last column in Ottawa Citizen, just a side note, he's moved over to the Canadian Press. He will be the editor for the Ottawa Bureau. Now he's talking about the hate for the carbon tax, the Liberal federal carbon tax, and hating it doesn't give a replacement. The federal Liberals have put up the most conservative climate change plan Canada has ever seriously considered, and Ontario's Conservative government hates it. It is, as you know, a tax on carbon-heavy fuels of $20 for every ton of carbon dioxide they emit when burned. In the involved provinces, including Ontario, the money will be rebated in equal shares to taxpayers, and the tax will rise over time. A carbon tax whose proceeds are returned this way, 90% to individuals and 10% to businesses in this case. That is the most conservative, economist-approved way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Unlike most of our taxes, which skim off the top of wealth creation in various forms, a carbon tax punishes a behavior we don't want, namely polluting. This is the canonical right-wing approach to climate change. Premier Doug Ford says, the Trudeau carbon tax does nothing for the environment because prices don't affect people's behavior. There's no universe in which that's true, and it's an especially weird notion to hear from a so-called conservative. That prices matter is fundamental to everything we know about economics. Ford goes on, our government is pursuing an innovative approach to protecting the environment and business for years to come. The Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks recently launched public consultations as part of his development of a Made in Ontario Environment Plan and is on track to present that plan in the coming months. Now, this is true in as much that Environment Minister Rod Phillips put up an internet page inviting suggestions. It's literally just one field on a web form labeled Your Ideas. It doesn't offer possibilities the government is considering, or ask you to weigh competing values, or do anything else that might help gauge Ontarians' views. Just your ideas. The Conservatives cancelled Ontario's cap-and-trade program without having any idea what they might replace it with. We have one live plan to combat climate change in Ontario, the federal one. And the Ford Conservatives are beating it down with no alternative to propose, while insisting they are the virtuous ones. The people of Ontario know I will do everything in my power and use every tool at my disposal to fight this punishing, job-killing tax. We will take this fight all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary, but more importantly, we will take this fight to the people. A person could honestly argue that climate change isn't a problem we should seek to do anything about, or that the federal Liberals' plan isn't the best thing to do. That's not what the Ontario Tories are arguing. They're just shouting. Now, Professor Jack Mintz of the University of Calgary and Professor Nancy Olaweiler of Simon Fraser University, both noted economists, made the case for carbon taxes to replace the federal gas tax in 2008, back when it looked as though the Harper Conservatives were interested in doing something. In short, converting the existing tax on vehicle fuels into a broader, environmentally based fuel tax and using the revenues to reduce other taxes could contribute to both a better environment and economy, they wrote. Now, the current federal Liberal plan is even more fiscally conservative. Rather than plugging the carbon tax's revenues into twiddly tax cuts here and there, they'll just give everyone money back. Unlike cap-and-trade emissions permits, the carbon tax is simple to administer. Once the government decides just what it's going to tax and by how much the proceeds come in, they get tallied, divvied up, and sent out again using the Canada Revenue Agency, a bureaucracy we already have. The top-level math to make sure the government's not messing around does not require a team of auditors. How much came in? Okay, did the same amount go out? If not, we'll adjust the rebates next year. Repeat annually. A fourth grader could do it with a pocket calculator. Now, the best part, the thing that makes this notion extra bonus conservative, is that people who pollute a lot can become people who pollute less. Whatever works for you, you can do. The government's not ordering you to switch out all your light bulbs. It's just saying that dumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere has a cost, and it will be borne by the people who do it. The invisible subsidy for waste will be reduced gradually and eventually disappear. Versions of this have demonstrably worked in jurisdictions from Australia to Europe to BC. The knock on them is that they haven't cut those places' emissions enough yet. In fact, they're all designed to increase slowly so people have time to adjust. This is a shift, not a shock. Now, that is easily and falsely simplified to carbon taxes don't work. I think that's very logical. When you look at what conservatism is supposed to be, that's exactly what goes along with their ideology. You want to heat everything, you want to run AC all year, you want to do this, you want to do that, instead of opening your windows, maybe letting in a mosquito or two, pay. It makes sense. Again, back to something I said a long time ago on the show, comparing it to like a sin tax. Now, the next reason where you'll be surprised to hear it from, Jim Farney is an associate professor of politics at the University of Regina in the Calgary Herald, November 5th. Is there a conservative case against the carbon tax? Not really. Conservative politicians across Canada have strongly opposed the Trudeau government's promise to impose a carbon tax since the idea was floated in 2015. Beginning with Premier Brad Wall in Saskatchewan, opposition is now a central commitment of Conservative Premiers Brian Pallister, Scott Moe, and Doug Ford, as well as the leader of the official opposition, Andrew Scheer. It's easy to see how Conservatives would oppose a new tax created by the federal government. After all, what's more conservative than opposing a new federal tax? Dig deeper down into conservative principles, though, and it's hard to see where those conservative principles point except towards a carbon tax. This is counterintuitive, but conservatism in Canada is a rope wound out of 4 different strands: traditionalist conservatives, religious conservatives, free market conservatives, and conservative populists. The first 2 strands provide reasons to be concerned about climate change. The last 2 provide important reasons why a carbon tax is the appropriate mechanism to use to reduce emissions. Now, traditionalists are the type of conservative that are defined as a Tory in Canada. That's personified by Robert Stanfield, Hugh Segal, Peter Lougheed. They advocate for a strong government able to pursue the collective interest, but they limit the scope of what government does. They have long argued that the growth associated with unrestrained capitalism damages local communities. Contemporary British Tories like Roger Scruton argue for strong government action to protect the environment. Religious conservatives usually make the news for their positions on social issues, such as euthanasia or abortion. But all of the major religious traditions in Canadian society have well worked out traditions of social thought that cover the waterfront of political, economic, and social issues. Over the last generation, all of these traditions have increasingly stressed the importance of environmental stewardship, perhaps most famously in Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical Laudato Si. That leaves us with free market conservatives and populists, the largest and most politically important strands of conservatism in Canada today. They part company with traditionalists or religious conservatives on the importance of environmental issues, but both types make powerful arguments about how government ought to pursue public goods that have important implications for how to approach climate change. Free market conservatives, almost by definition, hold true to a central gospel. Setting prices through the marketplace is an extraordinarily efficient way to allocate scarce resources. They don't like taxes. However, they recognize the good that can come from a transparent tax imposed fairly for a demonstrable social good. Free market conservatives will argue cap and trade, or carbon rationing, requires a much more robust level of government intervention, and such taxes would destroy the market's ability to communicate value accurately through setting prices. As such, they create winners and losers. A transparent tax, like the carbon tax, they might argue, treats all emissions equally. In so doing, it preserves the market's inherent ability to accurately set the most efficient price. This leaves populists. If by populist we mean popular, then Premiers Moe and Ford have hit pay dirt. But if we mean populist in the way that Canada's most notable conservative populist, Preston Manning, defined the term, then we come to a different position. Manning emphasized that to be populist was to create mechanisms that allow ordinary people to bring their wisdom to bear on the making of public policy. Recognizing the carbon cost of consumption decisions is a direct and transparent way to involve ordinary people in collective decisions. We end up in the same place as free market arguments. Indeed, Manning himself publicly supports a carbon tax. So what are we left with when 2 arguments often made by conservatives, but which, strictly speaking, are not conservative? One is jurisdictional. This is a policy area in which the provinces ought to take the lead and not the federal government. Ultimately, this question will be decided by the courts. The other is regional, that a carbon tax which hurts provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan more than Quebec is unfair. Both of these are important sets of questions. Answering them may tell us which government should do something about Canada's global emissions. But it is inescapable that the what should be done, if it were to be done by conservatives, would have to look remarkably like a carbon tax. Very important point from the professor. Something that is simply just not being reflected in corporate media. Nobody is saying, okay, what are you going to do then? Why is this never brought up? And that finally gets me to Wells' propaganda piece. I'm not going to bother reading a whole lot of this, but there are points. Scott Moe was Premier of Saskatchewan for all of a week when he met Jason Kenney at the Manning Networking Conference in Ottawa. Now, Mr. Wells mentions the Manning conferences have lost some of their cachet. Well, yeah, you're not government anymore. But there's still a lot of shit that gets done. It doesn't matter if it's overflowing or not. It's the people who are there. Now, Kenny figured a window of opportunity was opening for him and Premier Moe. If charismatic leadership was lacking, perhaps a team approach could work. Now, since the autumn of 2017, Kenny, who Paul Wells, quote here, the intelligent and workaholic former federal minister of immigration under Harper, had been the leader of a new United Conservative Party in Alberta. He was and remains the man likely to become Alberta's next premier. He was presenting himself as the real champion of Alberta's energy industries, especially the beleaguered oil sands, whose suffering amid a worldwide slump in oil prices had led to the astonishing election of Rachel Notley's Alberta NDP. Holy fuck. So because oil crashed, the NDP won. Okay, that's like 200 words in. You're a propagandist. He misrepresents the social license argument from Notley and the NDP. Not that that matters anymore. But what he does in this article is he goes on to describe, basically, out in the open form, just not really revealing it in his language, that there is a national coalition. I mean, there was a time when politics did not interfere on the federal stage. Those days are long, long gone. This is the method of attack. And it's not as much about whether you hate Trudeau or this or that. It's about where this country is. Now, there are an awful lot of people that say what the Liberals are doing about the environment is nowhere near enough. Look at the IPCC report. I would tend to agree with that. However, caveat emptor, do you want a government who will do nothing? That's the choice we're going to have. The resistance that Maclean's and Paul Wells seek to fabricate is simply the resistance against them. They've picked the carbon tax. They will get their airplay. I think McKenna has outlived her usefulness. I don't think she's a very powerful minister on this subject. But she's the minister at this point in time. They've picked this topic for a reason. And look at everything else they want to bring into it. As Andrew McDougall said, as Brock Harrison said, making this about economic freedom. When climate change comes, when nobody buys tar sand dilbit because everybody else has a carbon tax, whose fault then? If you up here, triple rant, retire, Tony, hit the road. Look into who they are. What did you expect? And the resistance? Pompous Wells strikes again. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week on The View Up Here. Good night.